The world outside was a canvas of impossible white, a stark, breathtaking expanse stretching to horizons that dissolved into an indistinguishable blend of snow and sky. It was a place where the very air seemed to crackle with an ancient, unforgiving power, where silence reigned supreme, a silence so profound it echoed in the bones. The camera zoomed in, a digital gauge flickering in the corner of the screen, dramatically declaring the temperature, a mind-numbing 95, 8 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't just cold, this was a force of nature, an elemental challenge that most human beings would never comprehend, let alone endure. Yet amidst this frozen grandeur, a solitary figure moved, a testament to resilience carved from the very landscape itself. Anya, her 90 years etched into the weathered lines around her eyes and the deep grooves of her hands, pushed through the snowdrifts that rose nearly to her waist. Each step was deliberate, a rhythm honed by decades of survival in this brutal, beautiful land. Her breath, a visible plume, instantly crystallized into a delicate frost, a fleeting ghost against the pale light. She was a silhouette against the endless white, her traditional garments a muted contrast to the blinding purity surrounding her. Anya was alone, completely isolated in her ancestral homestead, miles from even the smallest, most remote village. Her companion was her small, cherished reindeer herd, a scattering of sturdy, shaggy forms, their breath also clouding the frigid air as they foraged for lichen beneath the snow. This herd was more than just livestock. They were her family, her legacy, the living embodiment of generations of Yakutian heritage. The atmosphere clinging to Anya and her animals was one of profound, almost spiritual isolation. It wasn't loneliness in the way a city dweller might understand it, but a deep, interwoven connection to the vast, empty plains and the surrounding taiga. Every gust of wind carried the whispers of her ancestors. Every crunch of snow beneath her worn boots was a dialogue with the earth. She moved with a quiet dignity, her movements economical, born of a lifetime spent in harmony with the relentless rhythms of nature. Her eyes, though aged, missed nothing. They scanned the tree line, assessed the sky, read the subtle shifts in the wind, a living encyclopedia of winter wisdom. She adjusted a stray branch for a young reindeer, murmuring soft words in her native tongue, a sound as ancient as the land itself. The bond between her and her animals was palpable, a silent understanding forged in shared struggle and mutual respect. This was her world, her sanctuary, a hard-won peace earned through unwavering endurance. Suddenly a subtle ripple moved through the herd. It began with a twitch of an ear, then a nervous snort from a lead doe. Another reindeer shifted its weight uneasily, its head lifting, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent imperceptible to human senses. The unease spread quickly, a silent current flowing through the group. What had been a calm, rhythmic foraging transformed into a wary stillness. Heads were raised, eyes darting, tails flicking. There was no visible predator, no immediate danger apparent to an outsider, but the animals knew. They sensed it, a primal instinct honed over millennia. Anya felt it too, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, a tightening in her gut. Her acute senses, sharpened by 90 years of living on the edge of survival, instantly registered the shift. She paused, her own breath held, her gaze sweeping the horizon, then focusing intently on the behavior of her herd. Her eyes, reflecting a lifetime of confronting harsh realities and surviving impossible odds, narrowed with a primal alertness. They were a vivid window into a soul that had witnessed countless winters, countless struggles, and emerged unbroken. Every muscle in her body tensed, her mind racing through possibilities, assessing threats. The profound isolation that had been a comfort now felt like an exposed vulnerability. The unsettling silence, which had been a constant companion, was suddenly broken. It wasn't a sudden crash or a violent roar, but something far more insidious, more chilling. It was the crunch of snow, distant at first, then closer, a rhythmic, deliberate sound that spoke of many paws, many bodies moving with purpose. Then, almost imperceptible at first, a long, drawn-out howl pierced the frigid air. It wasn't the lonely cry of a single wolf. It was a chorus, a symphony of hunger and intent that resonated deep within the chest, sending a shiver down the spine. The sound was ancient, terrifying, signaling the arrival of an unprecedented danger, a threat on a scale Anya had never faced before, one that would shatter her peaceful, solitary existence and challenge her very will to survive. This was not just a winter. This was a war. And Anya, with her small herd, stood on the precipice of a relentless struggle against overwhelming odds. The unsettling howl had barely faded into the vast, frigid air when Anya, with the instinct of a hunter and the foresight of a matriarch, felt the tremor of change beneath her sturdy boots. The first light of dawn, a faint pearly grey against the steel-blue sky, revealed what her ears had already warned her of. Fresh tracks in the newly fallen snow, not just a few, but a sprawling tapestry of paw prints. They were too numerous, far too bold, crisscrossing the snow-dusted ground with an unnerving confidence that spoke of a pack, not just a transient hunter. A prickle of cold, sharper than the biting wind, traced its way down Anya's spine, a familiar dread coiling in her gut, yet it was quickly met by a stubborn, unyielding defiance that had been forged over 90 Yakutian winters. This was her land, her herd, and no shadow, however large, would claim them without a fight. She moved with an efficiency that belied her years, her keen eyes scanning the perimeter of her modest homestead, a collection of weather-beaten log structures that had stood against countless blizzards. Every creak in the timber, every gust of wind whistling through the eaves, spoke to her of vulnerabilities she knew intimately. The low fence, sturdy for keeping her reindeer contained, would be little more than a suggestion to a determined pack of predators. The small, half-buried storage shed, usually a fortress for dried meat and supplies, suddenly seemed fragile, a tempting target. Anya meticulously noted each weak point, her mind already formulating strategies, drawing from a wellspring of ancestral knowledge passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Her understanding of the land was profound, a living map etched into her very being. She could read the subtle shifts in the wind, the patterns of the migrating birds, and the silent language of the snow with the same ease a city dweller might navigate a bustling subway system or interpret a complex stock market report. The wolf tracks weren't just prints. They were a narrative, a chilling prophecy of hunger and aggression. She saw the heavy drag marks of a large male, the lighter, more agile steps of younger animals, and the distinct imprint of a female, perhaps the alpha, leading the charge. Their path indicated an unusual brazenness, a willingness to approach dangerously close to human habitation, a clear sign of desperation or an alarming escalation in their hunting tactics. This was not the cautious, respectful behavior of typical wolves. This was an incursion, a declaration of intent. Her reindeer herd, a modest gathering of sturdy, shaggy animals huddled together for warmth and comfort, their breath pluming like smoke in the frigid air. To Anya, they were more than just livestock. They were the beating heart of her family's heritage, the living embodiment of generations of survival and tradition. Each antlered head, each soft muzzle, represented a link in an unbroken chain stretching back further than recorded memory, a connection to the very soul of Yakutia. They were her legacy, her purpose, and the very reason she endured the isolation and the brutal cold. Protecting them was not merely a duty, it was a sacred vow, as fundamental as the northern star guiding travelers home. Losing them would be akin to losing a piece of her own soul, a betrayal of all who came before her. As Anya completed her grim assessment, a distant drone, A sound utterly alien to her tranquil wilderness began to grow in intensity. It was the unmistakable thrum of a bush plane, a rare sight in this remote corner of the world, especially during such a harsh winter. A knot of apprehension tightened in her chest. She knew who it would be. Moments later, the small aircraft descended with a roar, kicking up a swirl of snow before settling clumsily on a makeshift landing strip a few miles from her homestead. From its belly emerged Lena, Anya's granddaughter, a figure instantly recognizable despite the thick layers of city-bought winter gear. Lena, in her late 20s, looked like she'd just stepped off a commercial flight from a major metropolitan hub, not landed in the middle of a frozen, desolate wilderness. Her movements were stiff, her face pale from the cold and the journey, a stark contrast to Anya's weather-beaten resilience. Lena's arrival was met with a complex cocktail of emotions, a flicker of relief, a brief warmth in Anya's stoic heart, mingled with the familiar, unspoken tension that had stretched between them for years. Their relationship, frayed by distance and differing life choices, was a delicate thing, like a threadbare blanket that offered little comfort. Lena, having grown up in the bustling environment of the city, had always found her grandmother's way of life to be an anachronism, a stubborn refusal to embrace modernity. She carried herself with an air of practical urgency, her mind already set on her mission. "Grandma Anya!" Lena called out, her voice thin against the wind as she approached, struggling through the deep snow. Her initial greetings were perfunctory, quickly giving way to her agenda. "It's too dangerous here. The news reports, the extreme cold, the wildlife. You need to come back with me, to the city. It's not safe." Her words, delivered with a mix of genuine concern and an almost corporate-like efficiency, were met by Anya's unwavering gaze. Lena had arrived with a carefully prepared argument, a logical presentation of why Anya should abandon her ancestral land, her herd, and her very way of life, all for the perceived safety and convenience of urban living. She envisioned a warm apartment, grocery stores, and medical facilities, a world away from the unforgiving expanse of Yakutia. But the harsh reality of her grandmother's existence immediately confronted Lena. The biting wind whipped around her, stinging her exposed cheeks, and the sheer emptiness of the landscape pressed in on her, a chilling reminder of the isolation. Then she saw them, the wolf tracks, an undeniable testament to the growing threat Anya faced. The sheer number of prints, their proximity to the homestead, sent a shiver of genuine fear through Lena, far beyond what any news report could convey. This wasn't some abstract danger, it was immediate, palpable, and terrifyingly real. The meticulously planned arguments she had rehearsed during her long journey began to crumble under the weight of the raw, untamed wilderness. The biting wind, a relentless sculptor of the frozen landscape, seemed to mock Lena's city-bred notions of assistance. Her carefully packed duffel, filled with high-tech gadgets and store-bought remedies, felt absurdly heavy and out of place against the stark, ancient backdrop of Anya's homestead. The first few days settled into a rhythm of well-intentioned but ultimately futile efforts on Lena's part, each one met with Anya's quiet, unyielding resistance. Lena, fresh from the bustling energy of the city, saw problems that could be solved with a quick fix, a modern tool, or a logical spreadsheet. She'd tried to introduce a solar-powered charger for a non-existent phone network, suggested a pre-packaged, nutrient-dense meal replacement instead of Anya's hearty, traditional stew, and even attempted to rig a motion sensor light near the reindeer enclosure, convinced it would deter predators. Anya, with a lifetime etched into her weathered face, would simply watch, her dark eyes holding a depth of understanding that Lena couldn't fathom. She never raised her voice, never explicitly forbade Lena from trying, but a gentle shake of her head, a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, or a patient demonstration of the traditional way conveyed a message far clearer than any spoken word. When Lena presented a brightly colored, synthetic rope as a superior alternative for mending a fence, Anya silently picked up a piece of braided reindeer sinew, strong and supple, and showed her how it was done, the movements of her gnarled hands fluid and practiced. The generational chasm between them felt as vast and cold as the tundra stretching endlessly beyond the cabin door. Lena, for her part, found herself constantly on edge, the silence of the remote land amplifying her own internal monologue of doubt and frustration. She missed the constant hum of city life, the easy access to information, the familiar comfort of central heating. Here, every drop of water had to be melted, every log split, every task a deliberate physical act. Anya sensed Lena's discomfort, the underlying current of her granddaughter's unease. She wanted to explain, to bridge the gap between their worlds, to impart the profound wisdom of living in harmony with the land that sustained them. She wanted Lena to feel the pulse of the earth beneath the snow, to understand that the reindeer were not merely livestock, but an extension of their very being, their survival intertwined with the herds. But the words seemed to catch in her throat, too vast and too sacred to be encapsulated in the modern language Lena spoke. How could she explain the intricate dance of life and death in this unforgiving landscape, the subtle signs that foretold a change in the weather, the sacred stories woven into the very fabric of their existence? Lena's pragmatic questions about efficiency and yield felt like a blunt instrument trying to dissect a living poem. The initial days passed in a tense, unspoken negotiation, a silent battle between modern expediency and ancient endurance. Lena was a fish out of water, struggling to find her footing in a world where her urban upbringing offered little practical guidance. She felt a growing, unfamiliar sense of inadequacy, a stark contrast to the confident, capable woman she was in her city job. Just as the awkwardness began to settle into a new, uncomfortable normal, a different kind of disturbance rippled through the isolated calm. One frigid afternoon, a snowmobile's distant growl grew steadily louder, eventually pulling up to Anya's modest dwelling. A man dismounted, bundled in a pristine, brand-new parka that seemed almost too clean for the harsh environment. He was a local, known to Anya, though not a frequent visitor. His name was Boris, a distant cousin of Kale's, and he carried himself with an air of practiced geniality that felt out of place in the raw, honest chill. "Anya, grandmother!" Boris called out, his voice hearty, though his eyes darted around, taking in the state of the homestead and the presence of Lena. "Kyle sent me. He was concerned hearing about the unusually harsh winter, wanted to make sure you were doing all right, staying warm." He offered a small bag of store-bought tea, a gesture that felt less like genuine concern and more like a prop in a carefully staged performance. Anya regarded him with a steady gaze, accepting the tea, but not inviting him inside immediately. "We are well," she stated, her voice surprisingly strong despite her age. "The winter is always harsh here." Boris chuckled, a nervous sound that dissipated quickly in the biting air. Of course, but this one. They say it's one for the record books, and a woman of your years, managing such a large herd all alone." He let the sentence hang, a subtle insinuation that was not lost on Anya. "It's a heavy burden, isn't it, especially with the wolves getting bolder. Heard stories of packs growing to unprecedented sizes this season." Lena, who had been observing from the doorway, felt a prickle of unease. The man's words, though seemingly sympathetic, carried an undertone that made her hackles rise. He was fishing, she realized, trying to gauge Anya's vulnerability. "The herd is my life," Anya replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And I am not alone. Lena is here." She cast a glance at her granddaughter, a subtle invitation for Lena to assert her presence. Boris's smile tightened. Ah, yes, Lena. Good to see you, cousin. But a city girl, no offense intended, can only do so much out here. This is a different world. He then leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice, though not so much that Lena couldn't hear. Kyle. He's a forward thinker, you know, always looking to the future of our region. He was just saying, with the way things are going, perhaps it's time for some of our elders to consider less strenuous options. He paused, letting his words sink in. Before continuing, he's got big plans for the area, you see, talking about a new ecotourism development, bringing in visitors from all over the world to experience the beauty of Yakutia. And your land, Anya, it's prime real estate for something like that. Beautiful views, traditional feel, a place for guests to truly immerse themselves. He gestured vaguely at the vast, snow-covered expanse, as if envisioning luxury lodges and guided snowmobile tours. He could make you a very generous offer, take the burden off your shoulders. You could live comfortably, without all this hardship. Anya's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something ancient and unyielding passed through her eyes. The stark cold of the Yakutian night seemed to deepen. But it wasn't just the plummeting Fahrenheit that sent shivers down the spine. It was the chilling symphony that now echoed with unnerving regularity across the frozen plains. The wolf pack, once a distant phantom menace, had shed its veil of caution. Their tracks, once faint whispers in the snow at the periphery of Anya's vast ancestral homestead, now etched bold, undeniable statements mere yards from the reindeer corrals. They were not just tracks, they were paw prints, deep and confident, often overlapping, suggesting a growing number and a calculated intent. Anya, with senses honed by 90 winters, could read the snow like a newspaper, and what it told her was grim. The pattern of prints no longer spoke of opportunistic foraging, but of strategic scouting, a reconnaissance mission for a coordinated hunt. The howls, too, had transformed. No longer the mournful, solitary cries of a lone hunter. They were now a complex chorus, a chilling harmony of multiple voices rising and falling, weaving through the frigid air. It was the sound of a pack communicating, planning closing in. Each high-pitched wail and guttural growl carried a message, a declaration of intent that stole the warmth from the air and tightened the knot of dread in Anya's gut. They were bolder, smarter, and far more numerous than any pack she had encountered in decades. The sheer audacity of their presence, so close to the homestead, was unprecedented. It was as if the brutal winter itself had emboldened them, pushing them past their natural fear of humans in a desperate quest for survival. The air vibrated with their hunger, a palpable force that pressed in on the small, isolated haven. Despite the creeping fear, Anya moved with the quiet resolve of an old growth tree weathering a blizzard. Her body, though bent by the weight of years, still possessed an incredible resilience, a muscle memory ingrained from a lifetime spent battling the elements. Each morning, before the first sliver of weak sunlight dared to touch the horizon, she would meticulously begin her rounds. Her movements were slow, yes, but every step was precise, every glance sharp, missing nothing. She checked the perimeter fences, woven from tough willow branches and reinforced with frozen earth, ensuring no weak spots had formed under the relentless assault of wind and snow. She inspected the makeshift tripwires, simple strands of sinew strung with dried bones, and metal scraps that would clatter loudly at the slightest disturbance, a primitive but effective early warning system. Her eyes, though clouded with age, scanned the snow for fresh tracks, interpreting every swirl and drift for signs of intrusion. She moved like a shadow, her traditional fur garments blending seamlessly with the muted landscape, her breath puffing out in frosty clouds. She carried her ancient, well-worn rifle, a heavy, reliable piece of American craftsmanship from decades past, its wooden stock polished smooth by countless hours in her hands. It was a comfort, a symbol of her readiness, but she knew its effectiveness against 1,000 hungry wolves was limited. Her true strength lay in her understanding of the land, her intuition, and the ancient wisdom passed down through generations. She checked the snares she had set, not to harm the wolves, but to deter them, to remind them that this land was defended. Each task was performed with a methodical grace, a ritual of survival that had kept her family safe for centuries. One particularly bitter afternoon, with the temperature dropping to an unthinkable 71 degrees Fahrenheit, Anya was performing her most crucial check, the main sled. It wasn't just any sled, it was the Winter Runner, a heavy-duty, reinforced transport sled, handmade by her great-grandfather. Its runners, crafted from a rare, incredibly dense Siberian larch and bound with reindeer rawhide, were legendary. They had carried countless provisions, injured animals, and even her own parents during a desperate journey through a whiteout blizzard decades ago. It was considered indestructible, a testament to ancestral craftsmanship and the unforgiving demands of the Yakutian wilderness. The runners were essential for her longer patrols, for hauling supplies from the distant village when necessary, and, critically, for moving any injured reindeer to safety. Without it, her mobility was severely compromised, especially across the deep, uneven snowdrifts of the taiga. Anya knelt, her joints protesting with a dull ache, and ran a gloved hand along the smooth, dark wood of the left runner. She felt for splinters, for cracks, for any sign of wear that might compromise its integrity. The wood was cold, almost burning to the touch through her thick mitten. As her fingers traced a particularly rough patch, she felt something give. A sickening crack, sharp and sudden, tore through the frigid silence. Her heart lurched. She pulled back her hand and stared, disbelief warring with a cold, creeping dread. A jagged, splintered fracture nearly a foot long had appeared along the grain of the larch just behind the front curve. It wasn't a superficial crack. It went deep, compromising the structural integrity of the entire runner. Anya stared at the damage, a profound sense of shock washing over her. The Winter Runner was supposed to be impervious, a symbol of her family's enduring strength against the elements. Its failure was more than just a broken tool. It felt like a betrayal, a weakening of the very foundations of her survival. It was a blow that struck deeper than any physical injury, a stark reminder of her own vulnerability and the relentless erosion of time. The fractured wood seemed to mock her, a gaping wound in what was once a bastion of reliability. Without this sled, her ability to traverse the vast, snow-choked distances around her homestead was crippled. Her patrols would be shorter, less frequent, leaving more gaps for the wolves to exploit. Hauling food or medicines from the village, a journey of nearly 50 miles through treacherous terrain, was now almost unthinkable. The village. The thought of it was a bitter pill. It was her only hope for a repair, for a craftsman skilled enough to mend such a critical piece of equipment. But the journey itself was fraught with peril. The worsening weather, the deepening snow, and now the omnipresent threat of the emboldened wolf pack made it a gamble with her life. Every mile would be a test of endurance, every shadow a potential predator. Anya knew she could improvise, she always had, but this was different. This wasn't a minor fix or a temporary workaround. Anya's weathered hands, calloused from decades of working the harsh land, moved with a practiced, almost desperate efficiency over the snowmobile's engine. Every bolt, every wire, every frozen component seemed to conspire against her in the biting chill. The engine, usually a reliable workhorse, lay exposed and inert, its guts spilled out onto the makeshift top, spread over the packed snow. She grunted, a sound of pure frustration, as a small, crucial part slipped from her numb fingers and vanished into a drift of powder. The air itself seemed to mock her, a constant sharp needle pricking at any exposed skin, stealing warmth faster than her thick reindeer fur parka could generate it. This was more than just a mechanical failure. It was a direct challenge from the elements, a test of her legendary endurance. The wolves were out there, a phantom menace growing bolder with each passing hour, and without her snowmobile, her ability to protect her herd was severely compromised. She felt the gnawing anxiety in her gut, a feeling she hadn't experienced with such intensity since the last great famine decades ago. Meanwhile, inside the small, surprisingly sturdy log dwelling, Lena paced the perimeter of the single room, her breath misting in the frigid air. The temperature inside, while a few degrees warmer than the -71 degrees Fahrenheit outside, still demanded multiple layers of clothing, and her fingers and toes felt perpetually on the verge of frostbite. She was a city girl, through and through, accustomed to central heating, hot showers, and the endless hum of electricity. Here, the silence was deafening, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind outside and the occasional creak of the ancient timbers. She felt utterly useless, a fish out of water in this desolate, frozen landscape. Her grandmother, Anya, seemed to embody the very spirit of this unforgiving land, moving with a quiet strength that Lena found both awe-inspiring and deeply frustrating. Anya's stoicism was a wall Lena couldn't breach, a barrier of unspoken wisdom and resilience that left Lena feeling like an awkward, pampered tourist. "Is there anything I can do?" Lena had asked earlier, her voice thin and reedy against the vastness. Anya had merely grunted, her gaze fixed on the snowmobile's engine, a silent dismissal that stung more than any sharp word. Lena had tried to help, to fetch tools, to offer a fresh perspective, but Anya worked with an instinctual knowledge that left no room for urban ingenuity. It was like watching a master craftsman at work, but instead of feeling inspired, Lena felt inadequate, a burden. Her frustration simmered, a low, constant burn beneath her heavy layers. She missed her friends, her apartment, even the endless traffic jams of Los Angeles. At least there, she knew how to navigate the world. Here, she was adrift, a stranger in her own ancestral home. With nothing else to do, Lena's restless eyes scanned the cluttered yet meticulously organized interior of the cabin. Her gaze landed on a small, wooden chest tucked beneath a narrow shelf, half hidden by a stack of dried herbs and a worn fur pelt. Curiosity, a rare spark in her current state of despair, pricked at her. She knelt, her knees protesting on the cold floor, and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among a few other faded keepsakes, lay an old leather-bound journal. Its cover was dark, almost black with age, intricately embossed with what looked like a stylized reindeer head and some symbols she didn't recognize. The leather was soft, worn smooth in places from countless hands, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and dried earth. She carefully pulled it out, feeling the surprising weight of it in her hands. The pages were thick, handmade paper, yellowed with time and filled with faded script. It wasn't Russian, nor was it English. It was the ancient YAKUT language, a beautiful, flowing script that Lena could only partially decipher from the few words Anya had taught her as a child. Interspersed among the dense text were rough yet vivid sketches, sprawling landscapes of the taiga, the stark silhouettes of reindeer against a snowy sky, and haunting depictions of wolves, their eyes gleaming with a primal hunger. These weren't the romanticized wolves of nature documentaries. These were predators, rendered with a raw, terrifying accuracy. As Lena carefully turned the pages, a narrative began to unfold, even without understanding every word. The dates, though written in a different calendar system, clearly spanned generations. It was a chronicle of survival, a testament to the relentless struggle against the very forces that now threatened Anya and her herd. She saw entries detailing blizzards that lasted for weeks, winters so severe that the sun seemed to vanish for months on end. There were accounts of ancestors battling wolf packs, not just dozens, but hundreds, the sheer scale of the encounters dwarfing anything Lena had imagined. One particular drawing, a crude but powerful image of a lone figure standing defiant against a swirling white backdrop, surrounded by shadowy canine forms, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The journal wasn't just a collection of historical facts, it was a deeply personal testament to resilience. There were entries about loss, about the grief of a winter claiming loved ones, but also about unwavering determination, about the deep, almost spiritual connection these people had with their land and their animals. It spoke of rituals performed under the full moon, of prayers whispered to the spirits of the forest, of a profound respect for the delicate balance of life and death in this harsh environment. Lena, who had always viewed her grandmother's traditions as quaint, almost superstitious relics of a bygone era, found herself seeing them in a new light. This wasn't just folklore. This was a living history, a survival guide passed down through blood and ink. A flicker of understanding, a tiny spark of curiosity began to ignite within her. Her modern skepticism, honed by years of urban life and scientific rationality, began to crack, allowing a sliver of ancestral wisdom to seep in. The journal was a bridge, connecting her detached, analytical mind to the raw, visceral reality of her heritage. It wasn't just Anya struggling out there, it was the continuation of a millennia-old battle, a legacy she was now, however reluctantly, a part of. The stories in the journal, though ancient, felt incredibly immediate, echoing the very challenges they faced right now. The ancient wisdom gleaned from those weathered pages offered a fragile flicker of hope, but the harsh reality of their present predicament loomed large, cold and unforgiving. Kale, a man whose ambition burned hotter than any winter hearth, was not one to accept a polite refusal. Anya's steadfast rejection of his initial, veiled overtures had not deterred him. Instead, it had merely sharpened his resolve, revealing a ruthlessness that truly chilled the bone. He had expected the old woman to be easily swayed, to crumble under the weight of her age and the relentless winter, seeing the logic in his proposition to modernize her operation. Her defiance, however, had only served to fuel his determination to acquire her ancestral land, a place he saw not as sacred heritage, but as untapped potential for profit and personal empire building. Without wasting a moment, Kyle initiated a subtle yet insidious campaign of whispers, leveraging his considerable influence within the small, isolated village. This remote outpost, nestled deep in the vast frozen plains, was a perfect echo chamber for his calculated machinations. Most of the villagers depended on Kyle in some capacity. He controlled the tenuous supply lines that brought essential goods from the distant towns, offered the few available jobs outside of traditional herding, and even held sway over the local council. He understood the delicate balance of power in such a remote community where information traveled slowly and fear of ostracism could be a powerful motivator. He began his work with a disarming smile and a feigned sigh, planting seeds of doubt about Anya's capabilities and her very place in the modernizing world. "Poor Anya, bless her heart," he would begin, his voice dripping with false concern as he chatted with villagers bundled against the biting wind outside the general store he owned. 90 years old, can she really handle 1,000 wolves descending on her herd? It's a tragedy, truly. What with the packs getting so aggressive this winter, I heard she lost another dozen head just last week. It's heartbreaking, but maybe it's time for someone younger, someone with more modern methods and resources to step in. He'd let the words hang in the frigid air, allowing them to take root and spread like a virulent cold. He subtly hinted that her traditional practices, passed down through countless generations, were not just outdated but inefficient, even dangerous to the wider community's progress. That land of hers, he'd muse, gesturing vaguely toward the distant horizon where Anya's homestead lay hidden beneath a blanket of snow. Its prime real estate for a new community hub, maybe even a small school, or perhaps a medical outpost. Imagine the opportunities that could bring to our struggling village. He painted Anya's deep connection to her heritage as stubbornness, her resilience as a refusal to adapt, framing her as an obstacle to the very development he championed. These subtle jabs, delivered with a practiced sincerity, slowly began to erode the villagers' long-held respect for Anya, replacing it with a creeping sense of pity and a burgeoning belief that perhaps Kyle, with his modern vision, truly knew best. After the ground had been sufficiently softened by the relentless barrage of rumors, Kyle made his next move, a gambit far more cunning and devastating than a simple offer to buy. He arrived at Anya's homestead not with an eviction notice or a heavy hand, but with a seemingly benevolent proposal, a thick document clutched in his gloved hand, filled with impressive-sounding legal jargon. He found Anya inside, tending to a small fire, the scent of wood smoke clinging to the air. Lena stood beside her, wary and watchful. Kyle's smile was wide, almost too friendly. He offered to invest in her herd, he explained, his voice smooth as polished stone. Cash for new state-of-the-art fencing, specialized winter feed imported from the south, even a brand-new snowmobile for faster patrols across the vast frozen expanse. $50,000, Anya, he announced, naming a sum that felt astronomical in their remote existence. No strings attached and almost. The almost, of course, was the catch. A hook designed to sink deep and pull her under. The seemingly generous investment came with an insidious, legally binding condition. Anya would have to maintain her reindeer herd at a minimum of 200 head through the entire brutal winter season. If the herd dropped below that number by the traditional festival of the winter solstice, just a few short weeks away, the land, her ancestral land, the very soil that held the memories and spirits of her forebears, would legally transfer to his company for community development. The words sounded so reasonable, so progressive, yet the underlying threat was chillingly clear. This was an impossible condition, a trap meticulously crafted to ensure her failure. The wolves, emboldened by the extreme cold and the dwindling wild game, were more relentless than anyone had seen in decades. The temperatures plummeted nightly, often dipping below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, making every moment outside a battle for survival for both humans and animals. Maintaining a herd of 200 healthy reindeer under such conditions was a Herculean task for any herder, let alone a 90-year-old woman with limited resources. Kyle knew this, and that was precisely why he had chosen that specific number, that impossible hurdle. Anya, despite her advanced years, was as sharp and shrewd as the Arctic fox. She did not need Lena to read between the lines. She saw through Kale's thin veneer of generosity immediately. This was not an investment in her future. It was a calculated contract for her dispossession. He wasn't offering help. He was offering a legal pathway to steal everything she held sacred. The profound injustice of it all burned hotter than any physical pain, a searing wound in her spirit. This was an insult to her ancestors, a violation of her very being, a direct assault on the legacy she was bound to protect. The pressure, already immense from the encroaching wolves and the merciless winter, now bore down with an unbearable new weight. She had to fight not only the primal forces of nature, but also the insidious, legally sanctioned machinations of a man determined to strip her of her heritage. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead seemed to disappear into a blinding blizzard of impossible choices. The biting wind, a relentless force that had carved its domain across the vast frozen plains of Yakutia for weeks, now churned into an all-consuming whiteout. Anya had faced blizzards before, countless storms that tested the mettle of even the toughest souls, but this one felt different, charged with a malevolent intelligence. The stakes had been climbing higher than a Rocky Mountain peak, and now the path ahead seemed to disappear into a blinding maelstrom of impossible choices. Just as the last sliver of fading light surrendered to the storm, the wolves struck. Not with the head-on charge Anya had anticipated, the kind of desperate brute force assault born of starvation she'd seen in younger, less cunning packs. No, this was a calculated move, a strategy that would have made a seasoned NFL coach nod in grudging respect. The blizzard, swirling like a chaotic cosmic blender, became their accomplice. They didn't hit the main body of the herd. Instead, a phantom wave of movement, barely discernible through the swirling snow, seemed to ripple along the edges, ghosting in and out of the blinding curtain. Anya, despite her 90 years, still possessed an uncanny sixth sense, a primal awareness honed by decades of living on the edge. Her heart, a sturdy drum that had beaten through nearly a century of harsh winters, pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "They're circling Lena," she rasped, her voice thin against the gale, pointing a gnarled finger into the swirling abyss. "Not a direct hit. They're trying to scatter them. Peel off the stragglers." Lena, bundled in layers of heavy parka and fur, squinted, her city-bred eyes struggling to make sense of the chaos. She'd spent her life navigating the concrete canyons of urban sprawl, not the treacherous, shifting landscape of a Yakutian blizzard at a bone-chilling 96 degrees Fahrenheit. She gripped her ancient rifle, its cold metal biting into her gloved hand, feeling more like a prop in a Hollywood survival movie than a tool of defense. "Where, Grandma? I can't see a thing. It's like looking into a milk carton." The wolves, silent and swift, moved with an almost supernatural coordination. Their method was insidious. They didn't engage in a full-scale battle. They played a psychological game, using the blizzard's disorientation to their advantage. Small groups, barely shadows, would burst from the swirling snow, nipping and snapping at the flanks of the herd, then vanish as quickly as they appeared. The reindeer, already stressed by the extreme cold and the constant threat, began to panic. Their deep, guttural calls of alarm were swallowed by the wind, their powerful bodies pushing against each other, seeking safety in numbers. But finding only more confusion, Anya, her face a mask of grim determination, knew the game. "They want to split them. Get the younger ones, the weak ones," she shouted instructions, her voice raw. "Lena, keep them bunched. Drive them toward the shelter of the ridge." She grabbed a stout stick, thicker than her wrist, and despite her age, moved with surprising agility. Her snowshoes kicking up plumes of powder as she tried to herd the panicking animals. It was like trying to contain a stampede in a cloud. Lena, though clumsy and inexperienced, tried her best. She fired her rifle into the air, the crack echoing like a distant thunderclap, hoping to scare the predators. She waved her arms, yelled until her throat ached, stumbling through the deep drifts. The sheer vastness of the snow-covered plains, stretching out like an endless white canvas, became their enemy. There were no fences, no natural barriers to funnel the reindeer. The blizzard was a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting, obscuring, and disorienting. Every landmark was erased, every sense of direction lost. Anya, her breath coming in ragged gasps, felt the crushing weight of her own limitations. Her legs, once tireless, now ached with every step. Her eyes, though still sharp, couldn't pierce the impenetrable veil of the storm. She could hear the distinct, higher-pitched bleats of younger reindeer, isolated and vulnerable, swallowed by the roar of the wind, and a cold dread seeped into her bones, colder than the unforgiving air around her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that they were losing. The wolves were too smart, too numerous, too desperate, and the storm too powerful a confederate. Hours crawled by, each one an eternity of struggle against the elements and the unseen enemy. Lena, exhausted and shivering, eventually collapsed against a snowdrift, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming in protest. Anya, refusing to yield, continued her desperate battle, but even her legendary resilience had its limits. The pack had done its work with surgical precision, exploiting the weaknesses of the herd and the overwhelming conditions. When finally the blizzard began to subside in the pre-dawn hours, leaving behind an eerie, breathless silence, Anya and Lena stood amidst a scattered, traumatized remnant of the herd. The wind had died down, but the air still held the profound chill of deep space, a brutal 90 degrees Fahrenheit. As the first weak rays of a sun, struggling to pierce the thick cloud cover, cast a pale, ghostly light across the pristine snow, the devastating truth slowly revealed itself. The tracks told a grim story, the telltale drag marks of bodies, the crimson stains on the white expanse, like cruel splashes of paint. Several reindeer were gone, not just one or two, but a significant number. A tangible chunk of Anya's precious herd vanished into the night, taken by the cunning predators. Lena let out a choked sob, the sight a gut punch that stole her breath. Anya, however, remained silent, her face etched with a profound, almost ancient sorrow. The loss was not just economic, it was a personal affront, a wound to her very soul, a stark reminder of the immense difficulty she faced. Each missing reindeer represented a piece of her heritage, a thread in the tapestry of her life, violently torn away. The wolves hadn't just attacked, they had outsmarted them, delivering a strategic blow that was far more painful than a direct confrontation. The herd, now noticeably depleted, was dangerously close to the minimum number Kale had set, the threshold that would allow him to swoop in and claim her ancestral land. The game, Anya realized with a heavy heart, was far from over, and the odds were stacking up against her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The biting wind howled through the gaps in the old log walls, a mournful dirge that echoed the emptiness Anya felt in her chest. The recent loss, a brutal testament to the wolves' relentless cunning and the sheer force of nature's indifference, had left a raw, gaping wound. It was a blow that would have crippled a lesser spirit, a setback that might have sent most people packing for the relative safety of the village, or even further to the distant, indifferent cities. But for Anya, it was not an ending. It was a crucible, forging a resolve as unyielding as the permafrost beneath her feet. Her 90 years had taught her that survival wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about bending without breaking, about finding strength in the very forces that sought to tear you down. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even about her dwindling herd. It was about generations, a sacred trust passed down through blood and bone, a legacy Kale's greed could never comprehend. She moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, her gnarled fingers tracing the familiar contours of her small, dimly lit dwelling. A sense of urgency, sharp and clear like the winter air, propelled her towards an ancient, worn chest tucked beneath a shelf laden with dried herbs and animal hides. Lena watched, a silent observer, her city-honed mind struggling to reconcile the frail appearance of her grandmother with the steel she sensed radiating from her. The young woman had expected despair, perhaps even a breakdown, after the wolves' latest devastating raid. Instead, she witnessed a transformation, a quiet ignition of an inner fire that seemed to defy the brutal cold and the crushing weight of their circumstances. With a soft click, Anya unlatched the chest, revealing not gold or jewels, but a treasure far more precious in their world, a collection of aged, hand-stitched, leather-bound books and scrolls. From beneath them, she carefully extracted a large, brittle piece of parchment, its edges frayed, its surface covered in faded, intricate markings. Lena's breath hitched. She recognized it instantly, a jolt of recognition shooting through her like a spark. It was the map, the very one she had seen referenced, hinted at, and partially sketched within the pages of the ancestral journal she'd been poring over. The journal, a silent companion during her restless nights, had become a window into a past she never knew, a lineage she had once dismissed as irrelevant, much like a forgotten family album gathering dust in an attic. Now, seeing the physical manifestation of its cryptic references, a new layer of understanding began to unfold, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Anya spread the map carefully on the small, sturdy table, her hands smoothing out the creases of time. The light from the single oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows across the complex web of lines and symbols. "This," Anya began, her voice low but resonant, "is more than just a map of trails and rivers. It is a story, a guide, the wisdom of those who walked this land before us." Her finger, calloused and worn, traced a faint, almost invisible line across the parchment. "They knew the land, Lena. They knew the way the snowdrift spoke of coming blizzards, how the wind whispered the movements of the herds and the hunger of the predators." Lena leaned closer, her initial skepticism a default setting from her urban upbringing, giving way to a nascent curiosity. She had always viewed her grandmother's life as primitive, a relic of a bygone era, charming in a folksy kind of way, but ultimately impractical in the modern world she inhabited. Her own solutions, born of spreadsheets and satellite data, had proven woefully inadequate against the raw, unyielding power of the Yakutian winter and the cunning of 1,000 hungry wolves. Yet, as Anya spoke, a different kind of logic began to emerge, a profound, intuitive understanding that resonated with something deep within Lena, a dormant ancestral memory she didn't know she possessed, like a forgotten melody stirring in her soul. "Our ancestors," Anya continued, her gaze distant, as if seeing through the thin walls of the dwelling to the vast, frozen expanse beyond, "did not fight the winter. They became part of it. They learned its language. When the ice groans like a hungry beast, it tells you where the weakest points are. When the willows bend just so, it warns of an approaching storm from the north, not just a gentle snowfall. The tracks in the snow are not just pathways, they are paragraphs, entire chapters of a story, telling you who passed, how many, where they are going, and why." She pointed to a series of symbols near a jagged peak on the map. "Here," she explained, "they marked the safe havens, places where the wind funnels away the heaviest snow, creating natural shelters for the herd. And here," her finger moved to a cluster of smaller, more abstract symbols, "are the wolf roads, the ancient migratory paths these predators have used for centuries. They follow the easiest routes, the paths of least resistance, just like water seeking the lowest ground. But they also know the shortcuts, the places where the herd is most vulnerable." Lena listened, captivated. It was like hearing a secret language, deciphering a code she never knew existed, much like uncovering a hidden message in a historical document. Her modern education had taught her to analyze data, to quantify, to categorize. Anya was teaching her to feel, to observe, to interpret the world with a holistic understanding that transcended mere facts. It was less about technology and more about empathy, about seeing the world through the eyes of the land itself. The journal, lying open on a nearby stool, seemed to hum with a newfound significance. The crude drawings, the cryptic notes, the descriptions of rituals and observations. They weren't just folklore anymore. They were practical guides, survival manuals written in the language of the earth. "My generation," Anya sighed, a rare note of weariness in her voice. "We started to forget some of these things. The radio, the snowmobile, they made us lazy. We stopped listening to the wind because we could just turn on the weather report. We stopped reading the tracks because we could follow a GPS. Kyle, he sees only what can be bought and sold, what can be paved over. He calls it progress, but progress that blinds you to the wisdom of the earth, that separates you from your own spirit. That is not progress at all. Anya's gaze, usually fixed on the vast horizon or the subtle shifts in the snow, now settled on the splintered wood of the sled's runner. Lena, who had been listening intently to her grandmother's quiet pronouncements, understood the unspoken command. Her hands, accustomed to the smooth screens of her smartphone and the ergonomic curve of a coffee mug, felt clumsy as she picked up a rusty wrench. The bitter air bit at her exposed skin, but a new kind of resolve, foreign yet compelling, coursed through her veins. This wasn't about internet signals or corporate deadlines. This was about survival, about a connection to something ancient and profound that she was only just beginning to grasp. "Here," Anya murmured, her voice a low rumble, pointing with a gnarled finger at a twisted metal bracket. Lena knelt, the frigid ground seeping through her thick trousers, and squinted at the damage. The runner, vital for gliding over the treacherous snow, was not merely broken, but had been wrenched violently, likely during one of the desperate dashes to protect the herd from the relentless wolf pack. It was a testament to the sheer force of Anya's will that she had managed to drag the damaged sled back to the homestead at all. Lena fumbled with the wrench, trying to find the purchase on a stubborn bolt encrusted with ice and grime. Her fingers grew numb, clumsy, and a wave of frustration threatened to engulf her. She was a city kid, born and raised in an era of instant fixes and disposable goods. Repairing something so fundamental, so physically demanding, felt like trying to solve a puzzle in a foreign language. Anya watched, her expression unreadable, but her presence was a silent anchor. When Lena grunted in exasperation, dropping the wrench with a clatter, Anya simply bent down, picked it up, and handed it back, guiding Lena's hand to the correct angle. "Turn," she instructed, a single word that held the weight of generations of practical knowledge. Lena gritted her teeth, braced her feet, and applied her weight. Slowly, with a grating squeal of metal, the bolt began to yield. A small victory, but in this desolate landscape, every small victory felt monumental. They worked in a slow, painstaking rhythm, Anya offering terse instructions: push, hold, straighten, and Lena translating them into action, her muscles aching, her breath pluming in the icy air. They scavenged for suitable materials. A piece of hardened reindeer hide, a length of salvaged wire, a sturdy branch from a fallen birch. It was an improvised repair, a patchwork of necessity, but with each knot tied and each piece fitted, the emotional chasm between them seemed to shrink. The shared physical struggle became a language of its own, bypassing years of unspoken resentments and miscommunications. Lena saw not just a frail old woman, but a formidable survivor. And Anya, perhaps, saw not just a disconnected city girl, but a granddaughter willing to learn, willing to fight. Hours later, as the brief Yakutian daylight began to fade into a perpetual twilight, the sled runner was reattached. It was far from perfect. The wood still groaned under pressure, and the makeshift bindings looked precarious. Anya ran a weathered hand over the repair, a flicker of something akin to approval in her eyes. "It will hold," she stated, but the underlying tremor in her voice betrayed her true assessment. It would hold for now, but it was a temporary reprieve, a band-aid on a gaping wound. The limitations of their remote existence were starkly evident. Without proper tools, without the specialized knowledge of a craftsman, their efforts were merely postponing the inevitable. The sled, crucial for transporting supplies, for checking on the far-flung parts of the herd, and for maintaining their vigil against the predatory wolves, remained an unreliable lifeline. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. They needed proper repairs. That meant a journey to the distant village, a perilous trek that would take days, possibly weeks, in the brutal conditions. The village was their only link to the outside world, but it was also Kyle's domain. The thought of facing him, of having to rely on the very man who sought to undermine them, filled Lena with a fresh wave of dread. But Anya, ever pragmatic, had already moved past the fear. Her eyes, ancient and wise, were already calculating distances, assessing risks, weighing the necessity against the danger. The wolves continued to patrol, their howls a constant, chilling reminder of their presence. And Kyle's influence in the village was a shadow that stretched even to their isolated homestead. The decision was made. Lena, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination, would make the journey. Anya, with her deep understanding of the land and its rhythms, would stay and guard the remaining herd, a testament to her unwavering commitment. Lena packed a small bag, mostly dried meat and a thermos of hot tea, her mind racing with the enormity of the task. She felt a surge of pride, too, a new sense of purpose that resonated deep within her. She was no longer just an observer, she was an active participant in this fight, a guardian of a heritage she now understood was priceless. The journey was a blur of white, a relentless assault of wind and snow. Lena pushed the sled, now laden with a few furs to trade and the broken runner as evidence of their need, her muscles screaming with effort. Every rustle in the taiga, every distant howl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She thought of Anya, alone at the homestead, facing the elements and the wolves with an iron will. That thought propelled her forward, mile after grueling mile. When she finally stumbled into the outskirts of the village nearly 3 days later, she was a ghost, covered in ice and exhaustion. The village was a small cluster of log cabins, a stark contrast to the sprawling metropolises Lena was used to. Kyle's presence was immediately palpable. His new, brightly painted pickup truck, a symbol of his modern ambitions, was parked prominently outside the general store, its engine humming, a stark contrast to the traditional sleds and snowmobiles. Lena braced herself, knowing that her presence here would be interpreted as a sign of weakness. She found the village elder, an old woman named Natalia, whose eyes held the same ancient wisdom as Anya's. Natalia listened to Lena's plea for help with the sled, her gaze unwavering. Word spread quickly. Kyle, always vigilant, soon found Lena. He approached her with a practiced smile, his eyes, however, cold and calculating. Well, well, Lena, what brings you to civilization? Troubles at the homestead, I presume." His tone was laced with condescension, a thinly veiled triumph. Lena met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "The sled needs repairs," she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We need proper parts, proper tools." Kyle chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Of course, that old thing. You know, Anya could save herself a lot of trouble. My offer for her land still stands. A nice, warm apartment in the city. No more wolves, no more broken sleds." "Her land is not for sale," Lena retorted, her voice gaining strength. "Not now, not ever." Kyle's smile tightened, stubborn just like her. But winter has a way of breaking even the strongest will. "Think about it, Lena. It's for her own good. My development plans would bring prosperity to this region, real progress, not this clinging to the past." He gestured vaguely at the small, struggling village, implying that Anya's traditional way of life was holding everyone back. Lena refused to engage further. She sought out the village's only mechanic, a burly man named Sergei, who, despite Kyle's influence, harbored a quiet respect for Anya. Sergei examined the broken runner, shaking his head. "Tough break, girl, but I can fix it. It'll take some time to get the right wood and the metalwork. It won't be cheap." Lena knew she had limited funds, but she was determined. She spent the next few days working odd jobs around the village, chopping wood, mending nets, anything to earn enough to pay for the repairs. Kyle watched her, his expression a mix of annoyance and grudging admiration. He tried to discourage Sergei, to sway other villagers against helping, but Anya's quiet reputation, her unwavering spirit, had a deeper root than Kale's superficial charm. As the festival of the winter solstice approached, the sled was finally ready. Sergei had done a masterful job, the new runner strong and true. Lena felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by the realization that Kale's schemes were far from over. Back at the homestead, the wolf threat had not abated, but Anya, with the help of a few loyal herders from a neighboring camp who had heard of her plight, had managed to keep them at bay. The solstice festival was a time for renewal, for community, for celebrating the return of the light. Kyle, ever the opportunist, had planned a grand announcement during the festival, showcasing his modernization plans, hoping to garner support and further isolate Anya. Lena arrived back at the homestead just as the first stars began to pierce the long, dark sky. Anya met her, a rare smile gracing her lips as she inspected the repaired sled. "Good work, granddaughter," she said, her voice filled with a warmth Lena had rarely heard. The emotional distance between them had not completely vanished, but it had thinned to a fragile, resilient thread. Stronger than any steel cable, they loaded the sled with fresh supplies, preparing for the solstice festival, a journey they would now make together. At the festival, Kyle, dressed in a sleek modern parka, stood on a makeshift platform, a microphone in his hand, extolling the virtues of his proposed development. He spoke of roads, of mines, of bringing the region into the 21st century, painting Anya's traditional way of life as an outdated obstacle. The villagers listened, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, some with a weary resignation. Just as Kale was reaching the crescendo of his speech, Anya, accompanied by Lena and the repaired sled, entered the clearing. Her presence commanded attention, a quiet force against Kale's bluster. She walked to the center, her back straight, her eyes fixed on Kyle. Progress. Anya's voice cut through the cold air. Is not measured in roads or money. It is measured in the health of the land, the strength of our spirit, the wisdom we carry from our ancestors. She gestured to the sled, a symbol of their resilience. This sled, broken and repaired, tells a story of hardship, yes, but also a story of a community's help, of the strength of family, of the unbreakable bond with our animals and our land. Kale speaks of new things, but he forgets the old wisdom that sustains us. Lena stepped forward, standing beside her grandmother. My grandmother's way of life is not just tradition, she added, her voice clear and strong, echoing with the newfound conviction she had discovered. It is a sustainable path, a way to live in harmony with this land, not to conquer it. We don't need to choose between progress and heritage. We can have both if we choose wisely. We can build a future that respects the past, that honors the earth, and that protects what truly matters. A ripple went through the crowd. Kyle, flustered, tried to interject, but his voice was lost in the murmurs of the villagers. Many had witnessed Anya's quiet strength, had seen the damage the wolves inflicted, and understood the struggle for survival. They saw Lena, a bridge between two worlds, speaking not of abandonment, but of integration. The tide had turned. Kyle's grand plans, stripped of their glossy appeal by Anya's simple truth and Lena's earnest plea, suddenly seemed hollow. The wolves, though still a threat, had shown the villagers the fragility of life without ancient knowledge and the power of unity. The festival of the winter solstice became a turning point. The villagers, inspired by Anya's unwavering resolve and Lena's newfound dedication, began to rally around them. They offered help with patrols, shared resources, and together formulated a plan to deter the wolves without resorting to violence, using ancient methods combined with modern understanding of animal behavior.